Okay, here's the translated and culturally adapted text, aiming for a general English-speaking audience. The words of Claudia echoed through the living room decorated with colorful balloons and cartoon characters, but to me they sounded like a death sentence. There I stood, my hands still holding the cake I'd spent 3 days preparing, a three-tiered castle covered in pink frosting, exactly as my granddaughter Lily had requested when she called me, whispering so her mom wouldn't hear. Claudia's eyes, my daughter-in-law, stared at me with that icy glint I knew so well, but which seemed even sharper that day. Around the table, the guests, parents of the kids' friends, neighbors, her family, froze with their drinks in hand. The silence that fell was so heavy you could touch it. I felt my legs tremble, but I held the cake steady in my hands, even as my heart was shattering into smaller and smaller pieces. "Excuse me," I managed to articulate, my voice coming out in a thinner thread than I intended. Claudia stepped forward, her high heel clicking sharply on the hardwood floor, and repeated with calculated calm, cold as ice, "You heard me perfectly well, Mrs. Hayes. You don't need to come to the children's parties anymore. Your presence is causing discomfort." Discomfort. That word hit me like a punch. I looked around, searching for my son David, but he was outside, distracted by the barbecue, oblivious to the humiliation his mother was suffering inside the very house I had helped build. How does a woman get to this point? How does a mother who gave blood, sweat, and years of her life see herself reduced to a discomfort in the lives of her own grandchildren? To understand that devastating moment, I need to go back years, when my story was written with very different inks. I was Helen Hayes, a widow for 15 years, a former public school teacher, a woman who raised 2 children alone, after my husband died in a work accident. David was only 12 when we lost his father, and his sister Emily was 9. I remember holding their hands at the funeral, feeling the crushing weight of responsibility that fell upon my shoulders. There was no insurance, no savings, there was just a 35-year-old woman with 2 children to feed and a pension that wouldn't come anytime soon. I worked 3 jobs for years. In the morning I taught at a local elementary school. In the afternoon, I did sewing at home, mending clothes, making uniforms, embroidering linens. At night, after the children were asleep, I cleaned offices downtown. My hands became calloused, my spine curved prematurely, and wrinkles settled around my eyes long before their time. But my children never went hungry, they never missed school, they never stopped dreaming. David grew up and became an engineer, graduating from a private university I paid for with the sweat of 1,000 sleepless nights. He was my pride, my golden boy, the one who always hugged me tight and said, "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to take care of you for the rest of your life." I remember believing those words with every fiber of my being. At 28, he met Claudia at a graduation party. She came from a wealthy family, the daughter of business owners, accustomed to international travel and expensive restaurants. From the first dinner I had with her, I sensed something strange in her gaze, a cold assessment, as if she were calculating how much I was worth. But I swallowed my concerns, because my son loved her, and I wanted to see him happy. At their wedding, 5 years ago, I worked like a mad woman to help with the costs. I sold some jewelry my late husband had given me, took out loans, did everything I could to make the party worthy of her family. Claudia barely thanked me. In fact, on the wedding day, I overheard her commenting to a cousin, thinking I wasn't around, "At least now David will be able to break away a little from this excessive dependence on his mother." Dependence. I, who had raised that man with my own hands, was reduced to a burden in his life. But I swallowed that pain too, as I swallowed so many others, because that's what mothers do. We bleed in silence so that our children can shine. When Lily was born, 3 years ago, I felt my heart burst with joy. My first granddaughter, with those almond-shaped eyes and the most beautiful toothless smile in the world. I offered to help Claudia, to take care of the baby while she went back to work. "That's not necessary, Mrs. Hayes," she said with a tight smile. "We've already hired a professional nanny." A professional nanny. A stranger would be more suitable to care for my granddaughter than me, who had raised 2 healthy and happy children. But I bit my tongue and accepted my reduced role, sporadic visits, always scheduled in advance, always short. A year later, Owen was born, my little grandson with golden curls. This time I didn't even offer help. Key changes and explanations. Asterisk Claudia became Claudia, common spelling. Asterisk Isabella became Lily, common less foreign sounding. Asterisk Ricardo became David, common. Asterisk Mariana became Emily, common. Asterisk Helena Santos became Helen Hayes. Hayes is a more common English language surname with a similar cadence. Asterisk Pedro became Owen, common. Asterisk Dona Helena became Mrs. Hayes, more natural. Asterisk cultural references. Asterisk Escola Pública became local elementary school, more common in US UK. Asterisk phrasing. Asterisk slight changes to phrases to sound more natural in English, while keeping the original meaning. I hope this helps. It would be rejected. I resigned myself to being the weekend grandmother, the one who showed up with little presents, who was tolerated for a few hours before being subtly dismissed. But the children loved me. I knew that. Isabella would run into my arms every time she saw me, her little eyes shining. Pedro would laugh when I tickled his tummy. They would call me secretly, asking me to tell them stories, to make my special cakes, to teach them how to make the origami they loved so much. It was in those moments that my life made sense, that all the sacrifice was worth it. If you are reading this story, and you identify with the pain of being separated from those you love, subscribe to receive more stories like this, because sometimes we need to know that we are not alone on this journey. That's why, when Isabella was turning 5, I dove headfirst into preparing that party. She had called me 3 weeks before, her sweet little voice saying, "Grandma, I want a pink castle cake, just like the princesses. Mommy said she's going to order it from the bakery, but I want your cake. Yours is made with love." Those words were like balm on my wounded soul. For 3 days, I worked on that cake. I bought the best ingredients that my modest budget allowed. I researched tutorials on the internet, practiced the mirror glaze technique, molded delicate sugar towers. Each layer was made with all the love that a grandmother can put into a recipe. On the morning of the party, I woke up at 5 in the morning to add the final touches. When I finished, I looked at that edible work of art and smiled, imagining Isabella's little face lighting up. I arrived at the party punctually, at 3 in the afternoon, the time that Claudia had stipulated for the grandparents. My daughter Mariana would also be there with her husband, but they would arrive later. The house was transformed, magazine-worthy decoration, full buffet, professional party entertainers. Everything perfect, impeccable, cold. I looked for a place to put the cake, but the table was already taken up by a huge ordered cake, a cute but soulless commercial structure. I brought the cake Isabella asked for. I announced to Claudia, trying to maintain a light tone. She looked at me, then at the cake, and her lips tightened into a thin line. "We already have a cake, Dona Helena, but thank you." Her voice dripped with poisonous politeness. "Isabella specifically asked me for it." I insisted, feeling something twist in my chest. That's when Isabella appeared running, her princess dress fluttering. Grandma's here." She threw herself into my arms and pointed to the cake. "It's my castle, Mommy, it's my pink castle." I saw Claudia's face contract into an expression of pure annoyance. "Isabella, we've already talked about this. You have the beautiful cake that Mommy ordered." "But I want Grandma's," the girl insisted, her forehead furrowing in that stubborn way that I recognized. It was exactly like Ricardo when he was a child. "Isabella, don't be rude. Go play with your little friends." Claudia's voice was sharp now, and the girl recoiled in fright. It was then, in that moment of visible tension, that other guests began to arrive. Claudia's mother, Dona Olivia, entered with her expensive outfit and her perfume that probably cost more than my rent. She greeted me with a distant nod, that kind of recognition that is given to someone who is barely considered part of the family. Claudia's friends arrived, well-dressed women, who looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity. I was clearly different. My simple clothes, my comfortable shoes, my gray hair tied in a practical bun. I tried to mingle, to talk, but it was as if there was an invisible wall separating me from that world. The party went on. Ricardo arrived and gave me a quick, distracted hug before diving into business conversations with other guests. My son, who once ran into my arms crying because of a scraped knee, now barely had time to look me in the eyes. I watched from afar, as he laughed with his friends, as he lifted Pedro into his arms, as he took pictures next to Claudia. I was there, but it was as if I was invisible. I tried to help by serving the snacks, but the buffet staff politely dismissed me. I tried to organize the children's games, but the entertainers already had everything under control. Each gesture of mine to try to be helpful was subtly blocked, as if my presence was not only unnecessary, but unwanted. It was during the happy birthday moment that everything fell apart. Isabella specifically asked that she wanted to sing happy birthday with Grandma's cake. Claudia was visibly irritated. She pulled Ricardo aside, and I saw a silent argument happen. She gestured, pointing at me. He shook his head. She crossed her arms. Finally, Ricardo came to me with a forced smile. "Mom, I think it's better." "Okay, here is the English translation, adhering strictly to your instructions to not summarize, rewrite, or add anything, and to preserve the original format and punctuation. I will not make any cultural adaptations in this response. Use the other cake. The photography people have already prepared everything." But Isabella asked for it. I replied, my voice failing. "Mom, don't complicate things. Please." He said this with a tired tone, as if I were a stubborn child. Something inside me broke at that moment, but I swallowed the cry and nodded. The happy birthday song was sung, the store-bought cake was cut, and my pink castle remained forgotten in a corner of the kitchen. Isabella looked at it with sad eyes as she blew out the candles on the other cake, and that tore me apart. When the party began to disperse, I was gathering my things to leave quietly when Claudia approached. She waited until there were enough people nearby, not too many, but enough to witness. That's when she said those devastating words. "You don't need to come anymore," and everything I narrated at the beginning happened. I stood there, paralyzed, holding that cake that represented so much more than just sugar and flour. It represented my love, my dedication, my desperate attempt to remain relevant in my grandchildren's lives. "Claudia, that's an exaggeration," I heard someone murmur. It was Fernanda, one of Claudia's few friends who had always been kind to me. "It's not an exaggeration. It's necessary," Claudia retorted, her voice firm. "Dona Helena has a mania for wanting to control everything, for interfering, for making the children confused about who's in charge. Control, interfere." Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. That's when I heard Isabella's trembling voice. "Mommy, why can't Grandma come anymore?" Claudia turned to her daughter, softening her voice. "Because Grandma needs to rest, sweetie. She's an old lady." An old lady. As if I were an outdated object, a useless relic. I carefully placed the cake on the counter, wiped my hands on my apron, and looked into Claudia's eyes. "Okay," I said, my voice surprisingly firm. "If that's what you want, I'll respect it." I grabbed my purse and walked towards the door. Isabella ran after me, her little arms clinging to my leg. "Grandma, don't go, don't go." I knelt down in front of her, held her little face in my hands and forced a smile. "Grandma will always love you, my angel. Always." I kissed her forehead and left. The bus ride to my house was one of the longest of my life. Sitting on that hard seat, looking out the foggy window, I felt the weight of all the years of sacrifice falling on me like an avalanche. What was it all for? To be discarded like an old piece of furniture. I arrived at my small apartment, 2 humble but clean rooms, with photos of my children and grandchildren scattered on the walls. I looked at those photos and wondered if I still meant anything to them. In the days that followed, I fell into a spiral of pain and questioning. I didn't receive any call from Ricardo. No apologies, no attempt to fix what had been broken. Mariana called, furious with her brother, but that didn't change anything. The children tried to call me a few times, but Claudia always interrupted the calls. I was being erased from their lives, and there was nothing I could do. I started waking up in the middle of the night, my chest tight, questioning every choice I had made. Had I been too much of a mother? Was my love suffocating? Was Claudia right? Loneliness was a constant companion, heavy, relentless. It was 2 weeks after the incident that I received an unexpected visit. Dona Marcia, a former neighbor of Ricardo and Claudia, rang my doorbell on a gray afternoon. She was an elegant, retired lady who had always been kind to me in the few encounters we had. Dona Helena, I need to talk to you, she said, her face serious. I made coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table. Marcia stirred her cup for a long moment before speaking. I need to tell you something I discovered by chance, about Claudia. My heart quickened. 3 months ago, construction began at their house. A big expensive renovation. Marcia continued. I was curious because they had moved in recently, so I talked to the foreman. Do you know what he told me? That they are building a complete suite on the ground floor, with an adapted bathroom, all prepared for an elderly person. I looked at her without understanding. For whom? For Claudia's mother. Dona Olivia has health problems and will be living with them. The renovation is almost complete. The words took a few seconds to process. When I finally understood what that meant, I felt as if the floor had disappeared from under my feet. So, they are preparing the house for her mother to live there. Exactly. And there's more. Marcia hesitated. I heard Claudia talking to a friend at the market. She said she needed to set boundaries with you because she didn't want the children to be confused with two grandmothers present Tess. With her mother living there, her presence would become, as she put it, redundant. Redundant. That word echoed in my head, like a death knell. It all started to make sense. The growing coldness, the increasingly infrequent invitations, the public humiliation at the party. Claudia was systematically pushing me away to make room for her own mother. Why are you telling me this? I asked Marcia, my voice choked with emotion. Because it's unfair. Because I saw what you did for that boy. Because I saw how much you love those children. And because she held my hand. Sometimes the truth needs to be told, even when it hurts. After Marcia left, I sat in my small room, and finally let the tears fall. But along with the pain, something different began to grow inside me. It wasn't anger, although there was some of that. It was something deeper, more powerful. It was clarity. For years I had diminished myself, accepted crumbs, swallowed humiliations, all because I was afraid of losing my son and my grandchildren. But in that moment of brutal revelation, I realized something fundamental. By accepting being treated as less than I was teaching my grandchildren that love could be conditional, that people could be discarded, that sacrifice had no value. And that wasn't the lesson I wanted to leave behind. I spent the following days in deep reflection. I spoke at length with Mariana, who supported me unconditionally. I sought advice from an old friend who is a psychologist. I read texts about healthy boundaries, about self-love, about motherhood, and its emotional pitfalls. And slowly I began to rebuild something I had lost over the years of sacrifice, my dignity. A month after the party, Ricardo finally called me. His voice sounded uncomfortable. Mom, we need to talk. Yes, we do, I replied, my voice calm. We arranged to meet for coffee in a neutral place. When I saw him arriving, I noticed he was different. Tense shoulders, evasive gaze. We sat down, and he began with that kind of conversation, full of roundabout phrases, talking about how busy life was, how things had been misinterpreted, how stressed Claudia was. I let him talk. When he finished, I took a deep breath and said, Ricardo, I know about the suite you're building for Claudia's mother. He paled. Mom. Let me finish. I interrupted, my voice firm but not aggressive. I have no problem with you welcoming Dona Olivia. It's a beautiful thing to take care of your parents. But I have a problem with being publicly humiliated, with being kept away from my grandchildren, with being treated as a nuisance, while another grandmother is welcomed with open arms. Ricardo opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. It's not like that. It's exactly like that, I replied. And you know what the saddest part is? That you let it happen. You whom I raised alone, whom I worked 3 jobs to give an education, whom I sold my jewelry to pay for your wedding. You remained silent while your wife humiliated me. I saw tears forming in his eyes. Mom, I didn't know what to do. Claudia is my wife. I need to support her. Support her in what? In cruelty, in injustice. My voice trembled, but not from weakness. It was the strength of the truth finally being released. You don't have to choose between your wife and your mother, Ricardo. But you need to have enough character not to allow anyone to be disrespected. Not her, not me, not the children. He lowered his head, the tears now flowing freely. I'm sorry, Mom. I was a coward. I know I was. Yes, you were. I agreed. And that truth spoken without anger, but with firmness, felt liberating. And now you need to decide what kind of man you want to be. The one I raised or the one who hides behind silence. I left money for the coffee on the table and got up. When you're ready to have a real conversation involving Claudia, about mutual respect, and about the role I may or may not have in the lives of my grandchildren, in a dignified way, call me. Until then, I won't accept crumbs of affection. I left that cafe with my head held high, my heart racing, but my soul lighter than it had been in months. The weeks that followed were transformative. I went back to doing the things I had abandoned. I rejoined my craft group at church, started senior dance classes, volunteered to tutor underprivileged children. I reconnected with old friends, made new friends, rediscovered that my life had value beyond being a mother and grandmother. It wasn't easy. There were days when the longing for the children was almost unbearable. There were nights when I cried thinking about Isabela and Pedro. But I maintained my position, because I knew it was the right thing to do. One afternoon, 2 months after our conversation at the cafe, Ricardo appeared at my door. This time he wasn't alone. Claudia was beside him, and for the first time since I met her, I saw something different in her face. It wasn't exactly regret, but there was a softness there, a vulnerable point. Can we come in? Ricardo asked. I let them in. We sat in the living room, a heavy silence filling the space. It was Claudia who spoke first. Dona Helena, I came to apologize. Her voice was low, hesitant. I waited for her to continue. I was very unfair and cruel. She looked at her own hands. My mother was always distant, always put work first. When she got sick, I realized I wanted to make up for all the lost time, and in some distorted way, I thought that to give her attention, I needed to diminish you. I looked at that woman who had caused me so much pain, and saw for the first time, a real person, imperfect, struggling with her own wounds, making terrible mistakes in an attempt to heal her own needs. And you realized you were wrong? I asked, my voice neutral. I realized she nodded, and this time she looked at me. The children are inconsolable. Isabela cries asking for you every night. Pedro doesn't understand why Grandma Helena doesn't come anymore. And I, her voice faltered, saw how much they need you, how much I was depriving them of something precious because of my selfishness. Ricardo held her hand, and then mine. Mom, we want to start over, in a healthy way, with respect. We're not asking you to forget what happened, because that would be unfair, but we're asking for a chance to fix it. I looked at my son, that man who was once a boy in my arms, and finally saw a glimpse of that character that I tried to instill in him. It was there, perhaps late, but it was there. I want to make something clear, I said, addressing them both. I will not accept being treated as a second option. I will not accept being the second-class grandmother. If I return to the children's lives, it will be with dignity, with respect, with my place recognized. Yes, Claudia said readily. And more, I want your mother to be treated with kindness too. I don't need to compete with her. We are not enemies. The children have 2 grandfathers who are gone. They can have the love of 2 living grandmothers without it being a problem. Something changed in the air at that moment. Claudia looked at me with what seemed to be genuine surprise, and perhaps admiration. You don't resent my mother. Your problem was never with your mother, Claudia. It was with you, I replied honestly. But I see no point in fueling conflicts. Life is too short for that. We spent the next few hours talking, for real, without masks. Claudia told me about her fears, about how the difficult relationship with her own mother had distorted her perception. Ricardo admitted his cowardice, and promised to be more present, more firm in defending what is right. I shared my pain, but also my hope that we could build something better. It wasn't a magical reconciliation, where everything became perfect instantly. It was the beginning of something more real, a relationship based on truth, on clear boundaries, on mutual respect. The following weekend, I was invited to lunch at their house. When I arrived, Isabella ran into my arms so hard that she almost knocked me over. Grandma's back. Her smile was the sun rising after a long night. Pedro hugged my legs, laughing, and I, finally, allowed the tears to flow. But this time they were tears of joy, of new beginnings, of silent victory. Donna Olivia was there too, settled in a comfortable chair in the living room. I approached her and extended my hand. "It's a pleasure to have you in the family," I said sincerely. She looked at me surprised, then held my hand with unexpected strength. "The pleasure is mine, Helena. My daughter told me everything. You are an admirable woman." That day, while we were preparing lunch together, me, Claudia, and even Olivia contributing what she could from the chair, I felt that something profound had transformed. It was no longer about competing for space, or competing for love. It was about creating an environment where everyone could exist, where love was not a finite quantity to be divided, but something that multiplied when shared with generosity. The weeks turned into months. My relationship with the children was gradually restored. I returned to being a constant presence in their lives, not in an invasive way, but a meaningful one. Claudia and I developed, to my surprise, something akin to friendship. She learned to value my experience, and I learned to respect her methods, even when they were different from mine. Ricardo matured, finally becoming the man I always knew he could be, strong enough to be gentle, secure enough to admit mistakes. But the deepest transformation happened within me. I learned that loving doesn't mean erasing yourself. That sacrifice without dignity is not love, it's self-destruction. That teaching by example also means demonstrating that we are worthy of respect. For years I believed that being a good mother meant accepting everything, forgiving everything, swallowing all the pain in a qui estato tradução e adaptação cultural do bloco 6 para inglés, seguindo suas instruções. Original translation, silence. But I was wrong. Being a good mother, being a good person, also means setting boundaries, defending your dignity, showing that true love includes mutual respect. On Isabella's next birthday, 6 years old, I was greeted with enthusiasm. I made a cake again, this time without fear, without anxiety, knowing it would be valued. And it was. The children sang happy birthday around it. Culturally adapted translation, silence. But I was wrong. Being a good mom, being a good person, also means setting boundaries, standing up for yourself, showing that real love includes mutual respect. On Lily's next birthday, her 6th, I was greeted with open arms. I baked a cake again, this time without fear, without anxiety, knowing it would be appreciated. And it was. The kids sang happy birthday around it. Changes made and justification. Asterisk Isabella to Lily. Isabella is replaced with Lily, a more common and easily pronounceable English name. Asterisk ser boa mãe, to being a good mom. Mine was translated to mom. This is a more commonly used version in the English language. Asterisk general tone. Small tweaks to wording to make it sound more natural in English. Asterisk entusiasmo, to open arms. This translates the feeling conveyed, while using a phrase more common in English. Asterisk valorizado, to appreciate it. This maintains the meaning while using a more common expression in English. Asterisk parabéns to happy birthday. This switches from the Portuguese phrase to the English version of the song that is commonly sung.